it's been a while since my last video. Been having a little bit of health issues and been traveling a bit recently, mostly up to New York. Part of it's been to work on something that I might feature in a video later. Also, one of the things I did when I was in New York is I went to the first Red Party since the pandemic started. Met up with some people online. So if you saw someone at Red Party with Mephisto Waltz tank top, mask that totally didn't match anything else, that was me. Yeah, that kind of neatly ties into what we are talking about today, which is the old goth internet from like the 90s, 2000s, some old websites I remember seeing when I was younger. I feel like it'd be interesting to talk about these, partially because of a nostalgia, and partially just to kind of compare and contrast the kind of information you read off the internet back then versus now. So, as a disclaimer, most of these websites do not exist anymore. I think I had to use Wayback Machine to bring some of these back. One of them I couldn't even get back with the Wayback Machine, so I had to use a special tool called Old Web Today. Yeah, so these are old. You might see some like usernames or whatever on there. Please do not try to find out who these people are or bother them. This is just for fun. I'm not like criticizing anyone. Like, this is stuff people posted a long time ago. They might not even like think the same way now. Main purpose of this isn't to like be rude or anything. It's just kind of like have a little bit of fun. Except for one of them, like one of those pages, someone is kind of being like, eh. So I might be a little bit more harsh on that one, but I'm not gonna like insult anyone here. Right. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So back when I was in like high school, I was curious, why are the kids in school wearing black all the time? So I asked someone and they said it's because they're goth. And I asked, what's goth? And I was just given a circular answer. It's people who wear black all the time. So what I did was I looked it up on the internet. And the first site that came up was goth.net. Kind of a very search engine optimization-y kind of name. Goth.net sounds like super official. It's like, how could this site steer me wrong? So we're going to go over, for people who don't know, this is kind of like, so websites back in the day, they were kind of more about like general information someone would just write up. Wikipedia was either not around or still in its infancy, so it's not like where the first place people went to find out about things. You just go to a random website and hope it was correct. So this one has like stuff like forums, art, links, all sorts of resources and stuff. People wanted to learn more. And the page we're looking at over here is the What is Goth page. So, what is goth according to goth.net? According to their words, this is probably the hardest question any goth could try and answer. One may as well ask, what is society? As it has so many facets, it defies any definitive explanation. Yep, notice the word society there. Because, you know, we live in a society, ha ha, Joker meme, but this kind of like has that same level of pretension as we live in society rant, and like it's just meaningless, this definition. I'm going to go ahead and give a spoiler here. It doesn't really explain what goth is, but let's go over some of the details. So, goth in its simplest form is a subculture, a group of people who feel comfortable within each other's company. I mean, that's a good start. There is no specific thing that defines what you need to do or to be to fit in the goth scene, except, of course, the implied black clothing. People in the goth scene can have all different musical tastes, follow different religions, have different occupations, hobbies, and fashion sense. So yeah, they didn't actually define it at all. There's like some more text here. We're gonna like go over the questions and maybe a few tidbits, but yeah, they kind of copped out here in having to actually answer the question. So why do people become goths? Most goths become goths because they have been spurned by normal society, because the way they want to live their lives does not fit in with how most people are told to live theirs. And that's a bit more specific, but again, this could apply to like anything. Goths are free thinkers, people who do not accept the moral rules of society because they're told this is just how it is, or this is what God says. So So yeah, it's a lot about being rejected by normal society, but it does have like one good bit here saying this is not the case for all goths. Many goths today are goths for a variety of other reasons, like liking the music, the clubs, or having goth friends, which all of those are much better reasons. This last one here, this is like the real answer. It should just be up top and they could just delete the rest. Talks about the gothic stereotype. Mostly it's just saying we're not like the stereotype. We are all totally different and unique, which again, it's good to debunk stereotypes, but if you're not giving an actual definition, it's just confusing. Then it has a question, how do I get into goth? And then it says, go to check our community section over on the left and use it to find out what's happening in your local area. Goths tend to be accepting and open-minded. Just turn up to a club or event wearing all black, and you're already in the goth scene. You'll pick it up as you go along. Just a hint though, lay off the vampire comments. So this is actually some decent advice. Just actually like talking to people in the scene is probably the best way to figure out what it's all about. Though the goths tend to be accepting and open-minded, that's a bit iffy. I mean, generally, I feel like it's a pretty friendly community, but like, you never know who you're going to talk to, and maybe, especially if you're just some annoying person who wants to be a pest, and you read this and it's like, oh, I'm going to go up and talk to this person. They must clearly want to talk to me, a random stranger. And then they're rude, it's going to be like, they're kind of setting someone up for a bad interaction here. But they think weird, that's not even a question. This is just more debunking stereotypes. And in the last part, it's got a history of goth, where it does give like some vague background, like it was originally to describe a type of music, came from punk, though it kind of says as punk eventually died, and it's like, punk didn't die. I know punk's not dead is some cliche thing people like to make jokes about, but there's still punk music. It's not like it went away. But yeah, so it kind of says also, go into the community area, but it's also got like forums. So what's interesting is there's forums on goth.net, and it has its own like definition of goth that's totally different from the webpage. So this is posted by an admin, and they kind of wrote it for people who might be confused by the whole goth thing. Why this isn't in line with this, I'm not 100% sure. But I know the admin who wrote this is not the admin who created the site. Yeah, pretty much it explains being goth is not something you just stumble into. People don't really wake up one morning and go, hey, let's be a goth today. It just doesn't happen like that. But it also says it's not really in it either. People aren't born gothic, it develops over time. Both of these are kind of important because like it's trying to emphasize that no, it's not just like something, oh, I'm just going to be goth today, but it's also explaining it's not something you're born as, which feels like an obvious statement nowadays, but when you look at some of these other explanations that were around the internet at the time, it did need to be clarified, because there are a few pretentious people who's like, I was born goth. Pretty much it explains, in that development comes a certain interest in types of music. Goth as a subculture did not start out as a description of fashion, literature, art, mindset, or whatever other bullshit you can attach to it. It started out as music, purely music, and remains so. Gothic music relies on various elements in order to be classified as Gothic music. So yeah, this is the kind of definition you'll see on the internet all the time nowadays. So it's not like that idea was not around before. It's just it wasn't said very much on a lot of pages. What is going to be a bit different from back then versus today is under its definition of goth music, it includes darkwave, death rock, and industrial. So back in the day, at least for the casual person, obviously a lot of people did care about the difference, but for like the casual person, people didn't really like super nitpick them as totally different things because they shared a lot of the same spaces. And most people are listening to this music in clubs or through record labels and stuff, not in like specifically curated spots on the internet that's just this genre. So that's part of the weirdness with that. And the only other thing that some people might find a bit weird is it emphasizes Bauhaus and Sisters of Mercy as like the two most important bands, and kind of like starts questioning if you don't like these two bands, I kind of am going to question your goth cred, which I feel like, I mean, it is possible for someone to like neither of those bands, but like a whole ton of different ones. So I feel like it's a bit weird just to emphasize two bands, but like, whatever. It also explains what is not goth music, so it gives us kind of a list. On the list, it's got pop music and nu metal, which seems to be a weird combination, but it's that way for a reason. This person's trying to kind of explain how it doesn't matter whether it's pop or nu metal, neither one has anything to do with goth. Says it's not about like being mainstream or shock value or hating your parents or heavy guitar riffs, etc. Some of these are actual words being used. Says it's not on any sort of rotation at a commercial rock station nor MTV airplay, which that is not correct. They definitely played some like goth stuff on MTV at one point. And probably a little bit on the radio too. It's important to remember like some bands like Susie and the Banshees of the Cure had like successful songs. Even the Sisters of Mercy, they were like, First and Last and Always was a very successful album when it came out. It's not like it was some like super underground thing that no one heard of. Also talks a little bit about fashion and reading material, which is a little bit weird. Kind of says if you don't like to read or learn, then don't consider yourself a goth because you won't have anything useful to bring into a discussion. Let's start with the classics. And then it just lists some books. And it's like, it's kind of weird, mostly when I'm like hanging out with people, like no one really like talks about books that much. I mean, I'm sure there's people who like books and like talk about them, but that's not really a big point of connection with most people, at least in my experience. Your mileage may totally vary. So yeah, it's just kind of like, this one's a little bit snippy, but I guess if you've been on the internet at the time, especially if you're on some forums, you got like a million people just like having no idea what they're talking about, just like jumping on and then getting all upset when you tell them you disagree with them. So that's probably why there's a little bit of lack of patience there. Of course, we got another admin here emphasizing, no, you don't literally have to listen to only goth music. Though there was kind of like an emphasis on not listening to mainstream music up here, because back in the day, people did care a little bit more. If you like wanted to be cool and underground or whatever, you did not listen to popular music. Not like today where people don't really care so much. Yeah, we're gonna move on from this because I've got like a lot of these to do. And I don't want this video to be like an hour long. So another site I came across back in the day was a Goth Primer. It was part of the SF Goth website, so Goth Scene in San Francisco, I guess, had a website. This one is a bit different in that it's really tongue-in-cheek. So goth used to be a subclassification of punk in the early to mid-'80s. It emerged as its subculture in its own right, complete with its own graphic art, literature, music, and fashion. There is so much diversity within the Gothic world that its members strongly resist attempts at definition and labeling, yet there are stereotypes that linger. So again, it doesn't want to like put like a hard definition on it. But like you gotta also keep in mind, a lot of people don't like being restricted by like labels, especially back then. It's like people, they were just into this, some of these people, and then people started calling it goth, so yeah. So what is goth according to this page? Goth unashamedly celebrates the dark recesses of the human psyche. Put the back of your hand to your forehead, like cam staple forehead, like this. I don't know if you can see me through the cam. And you're there. Dark sensuality, sweeping sadness, morbid fascination, forbidden love, the beauty of enduring pain. You get the picture. So it kind of talks about Goth's counterculture, and it says Goths understood all along the importance of a good smoke, and it emphasized Goth as fun. You simply can't maintain a room full of despairing people dressed in black for very long without someone starting a chain of laughter. Once you realize you've gone over the top, there's nothing left to do but laugh. It's a self-deflating culture that delights in self-parody and in ridiculing itself. To put plainly, it's fun. So yeah, again, this kind of like isn't actually that serious despite some flowery words. They're like kind of having some fun with this. So yeah, this isn't a website you want to like take 100% straight. Just think, oh, this is totally serious. It's got a few pages, like facts. Yeah, it's a little bit slow to load because this is a Wayback Machine. And we kind of have to click to get to some of the stuff. Yeah, it also got like stereotypes. So it's got like the archetypical stereotypical goth here. Age none, goths are timeless. Diet of hors d'oeuvres and cigarettes. Natural habitat, cemeteries, cafes, bookstores, libraries, and laboratories. Again, like the books. Occupation, artist, computer-related, literature-related, student, clerk. And it's got like a bunch of like bits and information. But again, this is a stereotype. Don't take it seriously. This is a tongue-in-cheek site. Also has goth types. So yeah, these goth types, a lot of people nowadays seem to think it was something created by someone on like DeviantArt or whatever. But no, it was like some really old joke from back in the 90s. Even says so right here, the notion of goth type is more of an internal joke than a reality. It does, however, reveal the constellation of themes that collectively define the subculture. Very few goths are polarized as this list implies. Most are a combination of types. Moral, don't believe in generalizations about goths, not even the ones you read here. So it's got a few of like the original types, which most of these are more like personality types than like some specific style of fashion that people then tried to attach a certain style of music for. It's like you got romantic, mopey, perky, kind of like Seven Dwarves, Snow White. Some also some stuff like fetish, raver, goth geek, vampire goth, pagan, ren fair, etc. And they do have like entire bigger bits on each one of them too. So if you needed to read it in detail. So just as a side note, I am going to put links to all these sites in the video description, and I'll say that again at the end of the video. Also has a little section for other dark people, so death rockers, rivet heads, metalheads, weekenders. And weekenders is kind of a term that no one really uses anymore. But pretty much back in the day, apparently some people would kind of consider people who just went on the weekends and just dressed goth on the weekends just to go to a club to kind of be faking it or not as genuine. But nowadays, I feel like that's less of a thing with more the older scene with a lot of people with like day jobs. People can't like dress the way they want to 24/7. So like that's kind of a thing that's fallen by the wayside. Also got a few other bits like music, where it's kind of got like a weird collection of stuff. Some of these styles make sense, others like folk or classical. It's like, I don't think those are specifically goth. And it's kind of weird just to call Sisters of Mercy just plain rock or whatever. Yeah, so the music's kind of weird here. There are supposed to be links to MP3s. They obviously do not work through the Wayback Machine. Got a few other things, like a fashion page. You got like a few pictures. And there's some links for things. Anyway, we're going to move on to another site. So this is someone's general site that's got a few articles like Goth with a Sledgehammer and the origins of the modern Gothic culture. So this person, apparently they were at one point local to the DC scene. I know one of the DJs around here who's older mentioned kind of vaguely thinking they know who it is, but they don't remember who exactly. Asked on the DC Facebook page, and no one knew. Apparently, though, they had some kind of like angry rant about the DC goth scene back in the day. I can't actually find that page. I could have sworn it was here. Maybe I'm imagining it. But yeah, this is the only one I'm kind of like going to be a little bit harsh on, just because the level of pretension in this is a bit excessive, even for like all the other stuff. So yeah, what is goth according to this person? Ignoring historical references to European barbarian tribes and architectural, literal, and art styles, goth is a subculture. It started in the late 70s, both in Europe and the United States, outside of the club music scene. Notice outside, that's capitalized. The culture was comprised of individuals, also capitalized, with little in common but their artistic drive, insatiable curiosity, extreme intellectualism, and the socially unacceptable need to be and express themselves. So yeah, this is already just like a very pretentious definition right here. I might start talking in a little bit of like a snooty tone to read these just because it's more fun to do it that way. So how do I become goth, which is like a question asked on like a lot of these web pages. It was in the fact for the Goth Primer too. But yeah, so how do you become goth according to this person? I hate to break it to you, but goth is not something you can just learn. Gothic people grew up that way. Most people do not have the genuine sense of wonder, creativity, talent, open-mindedness, and appreciation of the duality of existence, nor of themselves or their abilities that makes a person genuinely goth. While some of these things can be learned over the course of years, most of it can only be emulated. To emulate something strongly implies that the action is neither original nor genuine. That is just not goth. This is just like it's hard not to make fun of this. It's like, this is just pretentious. It's exclusionary in like a weird way. It's like, it's not even being exclusionary on like some list of like things people can meet. It's just an easy cop-out to be arbitrarily deciding you're cool, you're not cool, etc. How do I know if I'm goth? This is a vastly more reasonable question. It's sort of odd and sad at the same time that a lot of goths do not know that they are. This is unfortunately the work of massive media stereotyping and misinformation from ignorant but rather noisy wannabes. And they spell bees like bees, a stinging insect. Seems like the bulk of available information on goth comes from those two sources. Never mind that. I'm going to kind of like give a list of statements. So if most 10 or more of the following statements are true, it is very likely you're goth. If the first statement is false, you aren't goth, not even if all 16 of the rest are true. So yeah, let's go over some of these. I'm not going to go over all of them because I want to keep this video short, but the most important one that this person thinks you need to have is you feel the need to spend a lot of time creating things: music, art, poetry, philosophies, stories, and the like. And I mean, I think it's important for people to be creative, but that's kind of like a weird requirement. Okay, some of the other ones are like, you like museums and cultural centers, you understand and even enjoy Shakespeare, Shelley, Browning, or some other similar work without having to read the Cliff Notes, which I'm not sure what either of those really have to do with goth. I mean, Shelley, maybe Mary Shelley, but Shakespeare? You know the difference between nihilism and existentialism, even if you don't really live by either. You don't feel comfortable looking just like everyone else you know. You base your opinions of people on who they are and not what they do, and rather than what they look like. You are afraid of mediocrity. This is just like weird, vague stuff. Oh, here's another good one. You don't understand why people around you spend so much time watching TV. Which is like, this is like some kind of like faux intellectual stuff that I don't know what this has to do with goth. Then it starts talking about how Laura LeMay is wrong. I don't know who Laura LeMay is. Apparently it's someone she disagrees with, or he, I don't know who this is. Okay, 10 Gothic stereotypes we all love to repeat. So it's, some of these are more than just stereotypes. Like, goth is a subculture based on a musical style. Like, most people will say, no, that's not a stereotype, that's true. Goth came from the hippie movement, which is apparently something people back in the day thought that no one would ever suggest now. Another one of those things, like, very different between now and then. I can actually kind of see why people think goths might be similar to hippies, though, just because of like some of the eccentricities of both. Yeah, it's just more like talking about doing some of these, like debunking some stereotypes. Some of these stereotypes do need debunking. Goths don't laugh except to mock others, and it's just saying this is just too pretentious, and it's like calling the pot, it's like the pot calling the kettle black. And then they've got like another whole like lecture here that I'm not going to get too much into, but it's all like talking about how there are like two factions of Goths, the Apollonian faction and the Dionysian faction or whatever, or pretty much the artists versus the party animals or whatever. And then it's saying, but the modern one is like only the Dionysian one, but like not even that, they're not cool or whatever. And it's just like nonsense. And of course, spelling old school with an E after the D, because why not? Ye old school. Right. As for another source, this is one was actually really good. There was Peter Skaith's History of Goth. Pretty much it just like had like some history of like the early years of Goth in the UK. So name bands, influences, year by year information. Talked about how some stuff that people might think were similar, like New Romantic, but they were not. Sadly, the 1982 entry you can't click on. Did he ever like create that one? I feel like it's like weird to stop at 1981. There's a little later history section that I feel like is kind of relevant, because if you like talk to some like really diehard old school people, they'll say like Goth kind of went downhill after like 84, 85, and this seems to be one of those people. Talking about how stuff changed with Sisters of Mercy and Cult and Mission UK, saying how some of these bands were all like, they're too hippie, or they're too classic rock or whatever. Of course, the stereotypical slamming of All About Eve is like, they're too hippie, even more so than the other ones. Then it kind of like gives some like interesting information how like a lot of people who were into the early goth stuff at the time ended up moving on to like other styles, alternative music. Talking about stuff like Zodiac, Mind Warp, and Crazy Heads, Carter and the Unstoppable Sex Machine, Ed's Atomic Dustbin, kind of like some of the later indie bands were all like Grebo and stuff, or Baggy, Manchester and stuff. And it talks about how like it kind of got a resurgence after got big in Germany and kind of mixed with electronic stuff. And yeah, there's not too much of, I mean, it's a good site with like lots of good information, but it's not like interesting to put in the video. So we're gonna do one last site. I had to bring this up through some service called Old Web Today because it did not get brought back up by the Wayback Machine, but this is an interesting one. So this is called the Real Goth FAQ, or FAQ. So this is like a very snarky, combative, frequently asked question thing. Oh, and see, here's like the rant from DC in this screen cap, because I had to screen cap this. I can't just link Old Web Today, it's got a time thing. If I can ever bring up the DC thing, I might make a short video about that. But for some reason, I couldn't bring it up, so. Anyway, so it's got some FAQs in sections like what is goth, the look, the music, the scene, tips for teens, miscellaneous questions. So, according to this, what is goth? A goth is someone who listens to goth music and looks gothic. Goth music includes old stuff like Alien, Sex Fiend, Sisters of Mercy, etc., or new stuff like London After the Midnight, The Horaci, etc. If you don't know what goth looks like, you're really clueless and shouldn't be reading this, but it involves a lot of makeup, big hair, and lots of black clothes. That doesn't sound like the goth I read about on alt.gothic or the local gothic mailing lists. That's because almost all of the people who are real goths have stopped reading those things. The reason they stopped reading them is because people like you keep asking stupid questions like, what is goth? People who were left on those lists are a unique breed, more about them later. And of course, the ever common, how do I become goth? First, stop reading about it on the internet. Second, buy a bunch of goth music and listen to it a lot. Third, look at the people on the album covers and try to look like them. Fourth, get a life. Go have fun, don't mope. If you follow instructions, you will have friends one day. So although a lot of this is snippy, this last bit's good advice. Just go around, listen to some music, hang out with some people. Just enjoy yourself, don't like worry about it. So, talks a little bit about the look. So, how to get your hair a certain way, about how to do makeup and all that stuff. And it's like kind of like a few jabs thrown at people who do like the super curly stuff around their eyes or white face makeup. And of course, there's a really good quote here that I love. it's an answer to the question, I got some black clothes, but people still make fun of me at goth clubs. So the answer is, one of those days we're going to print up some t-shirts that say, just because you're wearing black doesn't mean we like you. And that's important to keep in mind. Just because you're like the same music as someone or like wear the same clothes or whatever, doesn't mean you're going to be friends. And we promise that we'll make fun of you when you ask us where we got them. And yeah, it's just talking about you have to like make sure your clothes are cool and not like you just slapped on whatever. Of course, here's like, some of these are actually kind of rude and like not very cool to say. Like, someone told me that it doesn't matter how you dress as long as you're goth on the inside. The answer is, I'll bet that person looked like a potato. Did they have a big pasty potato face with a huge potato ass and stumpy potato legs? You were probably talking to a net goth and they say stuff like that to make themselves better for being fat asses. And I feel like that's kind of rude. Don't like fat shame people. Come on. Talks a little bit about the music, saying what it is and what it isn't. Talks about the scene. Got some advice like, I'm not old enough to go to any goth clubs, and they say silly, that's why God invented the fake ID. Also, it's like you can't really do fake IDs nowadays anymore. People have gotten better and stricter about that, and it's probably probably for the best anyway. I know like a lot of people older than me talk about how they got into clubs underage, and I like hear some of their stories, and like some of them are kind of horrifying. Like, maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing about nowadays. I went to a club and there were all these people wearing fake fangs. What's up with that? You accidentally went to a vampire club. So it was then making fun of vampire players. And it's like, I used to play vampire, but at the same time, having played like vampire, in my case, the Requiem rather than the Masquerade, a lot of the people who play that, some of them like I've had to deal with, are kind of so I can understand like some of the hostility there, honestly. Here's like a kind of an interesting question, which kind of dives into like the motivations behind why they wrote this. Question is, I met someone on the internet and he had a cool name and seemed nice enough, but when we met in person, he weighed 300 pounds, again with the fat shaming, not cool, smelled like a horse, and had a big booger stuck on the side of his neck. What's up with that? You made the classic mistake of meeting someone on the internet. I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily a mistake. Like I said earlier, I met some people from the internet earlier, and they seem pretty cool. Just because someone's on the internet does not mean they're like a loser, but you have to keep in mind, less people were on the internet back in the day, and kind of had like more of a stigma for even being on the internet that just made you like a huge nerd. This used to work a few years ago, because back then when someone claimed to be a goth, that usually meant you were going to meet someone who liked goth music and wore goth clothes and had a gothic look. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case. It seems that a whole bunch of internet nerds have decided that a fun thing to do would be to call themselves gothic and try to make friends. An idea especially exciting to them because they never really had any before. It's pretty insidious when you think about it, because once you've been introduced to this person online, it's much more uncomfortable to snub the little twit like the annoying pimple he is. This is especially bad because most of these people are socially backwards and don't really know how to interact with others. They'll do things like stand there and stare at you and follow you around and listen to your conversations, but they generally won't say anything. So yeah, the main motivation behind this is kind of like some hostility about some of the people online that were kind of annoying. Apparently someone explained to me who knew more of the backstory about this, that this is more of like almost criticism of like one specific person who was on like the NetGoth user group back in the day. Of course, there's like an interesting rule here. There's an interesting phenomenon where the cooler someone's online name is, the more likely that he's a big fat stinky booger adorned loser. Which, I mean, I guess it's kind of a humorous concept. The more cool someone tries to make their username, that's probably compensating for something or whatever. Question about Goth Babe of the Week, which was a real site. It's not as racy as it sounds. It was mostly just tame pictures. Yes, when I was like in high school, I clicked on it because I saw the name and I was curious. But yeah. Some people kind of like didn't like it though, because it was like attracting the wrong kind of attention, and I totally kind of get that point. Especially nowadays with all like the really fetishizing memes or whatever people make about goth GFs or whatever. That's not a new thing entirely. It was kind of a thing back in the day too. Of course, you got tips for teens, where it's mostly just telling teenagers to get over themselves and stop trying to be so edgy. And some miscellaneous questions about like absinthe and chartreuse, and about what goths drink. And just a few other questions. And of course the last one. So am I allowed to call myself goth yet? Not if you still feel the need to ask someone else that question. Grow some balls and decide for yourself. So again, that last bit, it's a bit snippy, but it's like good advice overall. Stop worrying about it. And overall, there's a lot of mixed information on all these sites. Like every site has its like own angle and different thing it wanted to say back in the day. So if you try to look it up online, you just end up very confused. Like I found it confusing. So like really the best advice is just don't worry about it. Here, check out some bands, go around where goths are, hang around there, like respectfully. Don't like go forcing yourself into places you not want to. Don't talk to strangers that don't want to talk to you. But overall, just check it out for yourself, then figure it out for yourself. Good advice. In general, the moral of all this is don't worry about what the internet says so much. It's true back then, and it's still kind of true now, because even if like the websites we have nowadays have like more clear, organized information that's consistent between places, a lot of people still worry way too much about this kind of stuff, and they shouldn't. So, anyway, this about wraps up the video. Hope people found this interesting, and it wasn't just, oh, I can't believe she's like reading all this shit. Like, please stop. Yeah, if you liked the video, feel free to leave a comment. If you didn't like the video, you can also feel free to leave a comment, like dislike, typical stuff. Feel free to subscribe if you want to like see more videos like this, and then especially want to know if this format or this style of video is interesting people or not. Trying to expand my presence a little bit. I don't just want to cover goth topics, but also when I do cover goth related topics, I want to like have a bit of variety and not just have it all be like music lectures. So yeah, I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, and I will see you in my next video, which hopefully won't be as long to wait as the last one. Bye.